The Hunter of Hollow Roads. Prologue. There are places out there, in the far stretches of highways, where the asphalt cracks, the trees bend in odd ways, and the air feels thick. In these places, travelers vanish, vehicles left abandoned, doors open, no trace of the people inside. Those who come across these places only whisper about what happens. But in the small town of Hollow Creek, they don't whisper. They know. They've seen the hunter. Chapter 1. The Long Road Home. Max and Lily, siblings in their 20s, were driving home for the holidays. The winding country roads were empty, lined with gnarled trees that seemed to reach out over the road like skeletal fingers. Their car's radio had lost signal miles back, leaving them in an eerie silence except for the rumble of the tires on the cracked asphalt. The sun had set a long time ago, leaving them in the depths of night, with only their headlights to pierce the darkness. Hollow Creek was just an hour away, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing in on them from all sides. That's when they saw it. Far off in the distance, something loomed in the middle of the road. At first, it seemed like an animal, large, hunched over, but as they approached, they realized it wasn't moving. "What the hell is that?" Max muttered, slowing the car. As they got closer, the headlights illuminated a massive figure standing in the road. It was wrapped in tattered, old leather and fabric, its body too long, too thin, like it had been stretched unnaturally. Its face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and two glowing eyes stared at them from the shadows of its hood. Lily gasped. "Go around it." Max tried to swerve, but the figure's head snapped up, its glowing eyes locking onto them. For a second, it felt like time stopped. The car screeched as Max slammed on the brakes, but by the time they looked again, the figure was gone. Chapter 2. Vanished. The adrenaline pumping through their veins didn't subside even as they drove further down the road. Lily kept glancing into the side mirror, but the figure hadn't reappeared. "I swear to God, that was real," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What was that thing?" Max stayed silent, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He didn't want to admit it, but he had felt something when their eyes met. It wasn't just fear, it was like the thing had seen inside him, known him. Every dark thought he'd ever had, every fear, every sin, laid bare. They passed an old gas station, one of those relics from the 60s that shouldn't even be operational anymore. A lone, flickering light was the only thing illuminating the station. Max pulled in, hoping to find someone inside. "Stay in the car," Max said, stepping out. Lily watched him head toward the station, her eyes darting from one shadow to the next. The place was eerily quiet, except for the occasional hum of the flickering light. Suddenly, she saw movement, a flicker of something fast, darting between the shadows behind the station. Her breath caught in her throat. "Max, hurry." Max didn't respond. When she turned back to the station, Max was gone. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Eyes. Panic set in as Lily scrambled out of the car, calling Max's name, but the gas station was empty. There was no sign of him. It was as if he had just vanished. Frantically, she ran behind the station, where she had seen movement, but all she found was an old, rusted door leading to a dark basement. Lily hesitated. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she knew she had to go down. The basement was damp, the air thick with the stench of mold. Flickering lights cast weak shadows on the walls as she descended the stairs. And then she saw it, a collection of photographs, pinned haphazardly to the wall. Dozens of pictures of different people, all of them snapped from afar as they wandered near the hollow roads. Each photograph had something in common: glowing eyes in the background, always watching, always hunting. In the last photo, Lily froze. It was a picture of her and Max, taken just moments before at the gas station. But Max wasn't in the photo. Instead, there was a dark, shadowy figure standing right behind her in the car. She turned slowly, her blood running cold. The hunter stood at the bottom of the stairs, towering over her. Its eyes, glowing, unblinking, bore into hers, and she felt her mind begin to fracture. Chapter 4. The Hollow. Lily tried to scream, but no sound came out. The hunter's eyes weren't just watching her, they were invading her mind. Thoughts that weren't hers flooded in. Images of long-forgotten highways, decayed corpses, and endless dark roads, stretching into oblivion. With every blink, reality around her shifted. The gas station disappeared, the basement was gone, and suddenly she was standing in the middle of an endless road, an infinite highway that twisted into the sky, surrounded by black, barren fields. She was in the hollow. The hunter loomed behind her, its bony fingers reaching out, gripping the air just inches from her. But something far worse stood ahead. Hundreds of figures, all standing still, all watching. Their bodies were desiccated, lifeless, as though they had been trapped in time. Max was among them, his eyes dull, his face twisted in agony. This was the fate of those who were caught by the hunter. Souls trapped in the hollow, forced to walk the endless road, their minds shattered beyond repair. Chapter 5, Mind Games. The worst part was, the hunter didn't need to touch you to capture you, it played with your mind. It made you question what was real, what wasn't. Every step Lily took felt wrong, her body moving without her control. She screamed, but no sound left her lips. Suddenly, she was back in the car. The radio was on, a static-filled voice garbling unintelligible words. Max was sitting in the driver's seat beside her, completely still, his hands trembling. But when she blinked again, the car was gone, replaced by a shattered landscape. Trees twisted unnaturally, roads spiraled into the sky, and the hunter's glowing eyes loomed everywhere. The world around her was fracturing, breaking like a mirror. Every direction she looked, she saw different versions of herself, some screaming, some walking endlessly with the other captives, some standing motionless in the distance. Her mind was splitting, shattering under the weight of the hunter's gaze. Chapter 6, The Endless Return. Desperate, Lily ran down the twisting road, her footsteps echoing into the void. But no matter how far she ran, the road stretched further, the hunter's shadow always right behind her, its glowing eyes casting an eerie light on the cracked pavement. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but there was no escape. And then she saw it, a car, their car, parked at the side of the road, headlights flickering weakly. She sprinted toward it, her heart racing, and flung open the door. But when she looked inside, she was sitting there, an older version of herself, her eyes hollow, her body frail and emaciated. The figure turned to her, a sick grin spreading across its face. "You never left," it whispered. The hunter was already inside her mind, feeding on her fear, her soul unraveling. As the world around her shattered once again, she realized the horrifying truth. There was no escape. Once the hunter had you in its sights, it would follow you, invade your thoughts, twist your perception, and drag you into the hollow. Forever. Chapter 7, Broken Reflections. Lily could feel her grip on reality slipping. Every breath she took seemed to drag her deeper into the hollow. The reflection of her older self in the car wasn't moving anymore, but it still watched her, unblinking, hollow. Behind her, the familiar glow of the hunter's eyes flickered in the distance, closer than ever. She ran again, this time without a destination, without hope. The road beneath her twisted and warped, the trees along the horizon shifting into impossible shapes. At one point, she saw a town in the distance, its buildings crumbling and twisted, stretching toward the black sky. But as soon as she blinked, it was gone. Suddenly, mirrors appeared on the road. Dozens of them, standing upright, like some sick art installation. Each one showed her reflection, but none of them were her. One was laughing hysterically, another was crying, and one stood motionless, its eyes bleeding black liquid. She couldn't tell if the reflections were hallucinations, or if they were pieces of her mind, broken and scattered. Then, one of the mirrors shattered, and from it, a hand reached out. Chapter 8, The Other Victims. The hand that grabbed Lily wasn't the hunter's, it was human. A man crawled out from the broken mirror, his clothes tattered, his face gaunt and pale. He looked like he hadn't seen daylight in years. You're real," Lily stammered, backing away. The man nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, glancing nervously at the surrounding mirrors. "It's watching. Always watching." He introduced himself as Jacob, another victim of the hollow roads. He had been trapped for years, though time didn't seem to exist in this place. Jacob explained that the hunter didn't just kill its prey, it played with them, trapping them in endless cycles of madness. "There are others," Jacob muttered. "All of us, trapped. Some are gone, lost forever." Lily felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a way out. Maybe they could find the others and escape. But Jacob's eyes told a different story. There's no escape. Once the hunter finds you, you're its plaything. It enjoys the chase. Chapter 9, The Echoes of the Lost. Jacob led Lily further into the hollow, and the road became stranger with every step. Shadows moved unnaturally, as if alive, and distant screams echoed through the darkness. As they walked, they passed other victims, or rather, what was left of them. Some stood frozen in place, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies warped into grotesque shapes. Others wandered aimlessly, whispering to themselves, their eyes glazed over. "These are the echoes," Jacob explained. "They're the ones who lost the game. The hunter doesn't need to kill them. It breaks them, leaves them wandering in this limbo forever." One of the echoes stumbled toward Lily, her face a mask of torment. She whispered something, but her words were too faint to hear. Lily backed away in horror. The echo collapsed, her body dissolving into shadow. Chapter 10. The Trap. Lily and Jacob continued their journey down the endless road, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking in circles. Everything looked the same: the warped trees, the twisting road, the oppressive darkness that hung over them like a suffocating blanket. Then they heard it, footsteps. Jacob's face paled. "It's close," he whispered. "We have to hide." They ducked behind a crumbling wall that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, crouching in the shadows as the footsteps grew louder. The air grew colder, and Lily could feel the hunter's presence, like a weight pressing down on her chest. But when the hunter appeared, something was different. It wasn't just one hunter anymore, there were several. All of them identical, all with glowing eyes and tattered cloaks, their twisted bodies stalking the road, searching. "Why are there more?" Lily whispered. Jacob shook his head, his voice trembling. "It's playing with us. It knows we're here." One of the hunters stopped, its glowing eyes scanning the area. Lily held her breath, praying it wouldn't see them. But then, without warning, the hunter turned its head, staring directly at her. Chapter 11. The Shadow Game. Lily's heart raced as the hunter approached. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the fear radiating from her. The others followed, their glowing eyes casting an eerie light over the twisted road. Jacob grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her away, sprinting into the darkness. The hunters didn't chase, they didn't need to. They watched from the shadows, their eyes tracking every movement, like predators toying with their prey. As they ran, the landscape shifted. The road beneath them cracked and split, opening into a vast abyss. The trees bent at impossible angles, their branches twisting into shapes that resembled human faces, screaming in silent agony. But then, the road reappeared, as if they had never left it. "It's a game to them," Jacob panted. "They like to push you to the edge. To see how far you'll go before you break." Lily couldn't take it anymore. "What does it want?" Jacob didn't answer. He didn't have to. Chapter 12. The Others. They came across more survivors, people like them who had been hunted for years, their minds slowly unraveling. Each of them had the same hollow look in their eyes, their hope long gone. One of them, an older woman named Ruth, spoke in cryptic riddles, her mind broken by the constant chase. "It's all a loop," she murmured. "Round and round. You can run, but you can't hide. You can hide, but it'll find you. It always does." Another man, David, had spent years trying to map the hollow roads, only to discover that no matter where he went, he always ended up back where he started. "There's no logic here," David said, his voice flat. "It's chaos. It doesn't follow any rules. It changes, warps." Lily realized that the hunter didn't just hunt individuals, it hunted souls. It fed off fear, despair, and hopelessness, breaking its victims mentally and spiritually before trapping them in its endless maze. Chapter 13. The Eye of the Hunter. One night, as the group huddled together in a decaying shack, Lily felt something stir in the darkness. It wasn't the hunter, not exactly. It was something deeper, a presence that had been watching her from the moment she stepped into the hollow. Her dreams were filled with eyes, hundreds of them, all glowing with the same eerie light as the hunters. But these eyes weren't malevolent. They were watching her, as if waiting for something. Lily woke with a start, her heart pounding. The others were still asleep, but the air felt thick, oppressive. And in the distance, through the window, she saw it, the hunter, standing at the edge of the road, watching her. She knew then that the hunter wasn't just hunting her body, it was hunting her mind. It wanted to wear her down, to break her, until she was nothing more than another echo, wandering the hollow roads for eternity. Chapter 14. The Vanishing. Lily and Jacob pressed on, determined to find an escape, though the others had long given up hope. The road grew darker, the shadows deeper, and the air colder with each step. But then something strange happened. Jacob began to vanish. His form flickered, like a weak signal on an old TV. His voice grew faint, and his footsteps echoed strangely, as if he were walking on a different plane of existence. "I think I'm fading," Jacob whispered, his face pale. "The hollow is taking me." Lily reached out to grab him, but her hand passed through his arm as if he were made of smoke. I can't hold on much longer," Jacob said, his voice trembling. "Lily, don't let it take you too." And then, just like that, he was gone. Chapter 15. The Ritual. Lily was alone now, but something had changed. The air felt thicker, like the very fabric of reality was unraveling around her. The road beneath her feet twisted and coiled, leading her toward a massive clearing in the middle of the hollow. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient altar, surrounded by dark, twisted trees. The hunter was there, waiting, its glowing eyes fixed on her. But this time, it wasn't alone. The echoes, the souls it had broken, were gathered around the altar, their hollow eyes staring blankly ahead. And in their hands, they held pieces of themselves, fragments of their shattered minds. Lily felt her mind fragment as she stared at the altar. The echoes, people who had once been like her, held pieces of their shattered minds in their hands, offering them up as part of some sick ritual. Each fragment was glowing faintly, pulsating with a strange, eerie light. The hunter stood at the center of it all, silent and motionless, but its glowing eyes were locked onto her. It didn't need to move. Its presence was enough to send a wave of terror through Lily. She felt something tug at her consciousness, pulling her toward the altar. The echoes began to whisper, their voices merging into a haunting chorus, urging her to give in, to surrender her mind to the hunter. But something deep inside her resisted. She wasn't ready to become another echo, another broken soul wandering these twisted roads. She couldn't let the hunter win. Chapter 17. The Descent. Lily turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. The road beneath her feet twisted and shifted, making it hard to keep her balance. The world around her seemed to warp, the trees bending and writhing as if they were alive. The whispers grew louder, chasing her as she fled. The echoes were calling her name, their voices filled with desperation and madness. But it wasn't just the echoes that followed her. She could feel the hunter's presence, looming in the distance, watching her every move. The air grew colder, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. Suddenly, the road split in two, opening into a massive chasm that stretched as far as the eye could see. The chasm was filled with darkness, and from its depths came a low, guttural growl, a sound that made Lily's blood run cold. She had no choice but to leap. Chapter 18. The Abyss. The fall seemed to last forever. The wind roared in Lily's ears as she plummeted into the abyss. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything but the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her skull. Finally, she hit the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and for a moment, she lay there, gasping for breath. The air around her was thick and suffocating, filled with a strange, metallic smell. When she opened her eyes, she realized she was no longer on the road. She was in a vast, underground cavern, the walls slick with some kind of oily substance. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, glowing faintly in the dim light. And at the far end of the cavern stood the hunter, its eyes glowing like twin beacons in the darkness. Chapter 19. The Labyrinth. The cavern wasn't a single space. As Lily began to move through it, she realized that the walls shifted, creating a labyrinth of narrow passageways and dead ends. The hunter was nowhere to be seen, but she could feel its presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The walls seemed to pulse with every step she took, the symbols etched into the stone shifting and changing as she moved. It was as if the labyrinth was alive, responding to her every movement. As she wandered deeper into the maze, she began to hear faint whispers, Jacob's voice, calling to her from somewhere within the walls. She followed the sound, hoping to find him, but the deeper she went, the more twisted the voices became. They weren't just Jacob anymore. They were the echoes, all of them speaking at once, their words blending together into a maddening cacophony. Chapter 20. The Hunter's Game. The labyrinth wasn't meant to be solved. It was a trap, designed to break her will, to wear her down until she was too exhausted to fight anymore. The walls closed in around her, the passageways narrowing until she could barely move. She could feel the hunter's gaze on her, even though she couldn't see it. It was watching her, waiting for her to fall, to give up. But Lily wasn't ready to give up yet. She pressed on, forcing her way through the narrow passageways, her body bruised and bleeding from the jagged stones. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging her to turn back, to surrender. She wouldn't. Chapter 21, The Hall of Mirrors. Finally, after what felt like days of wandering through the maze, Lily stumbled into a large chamber. The walls were lined with mirrors, just like the ones she had seen earlier, but these were different. They weren't cracked or broken. They were pristine, reflecting her image back at her with perfect clarity. But something was wrong. Her reflection didn't look like her anymore. It was distorted, its features twisted and warped, its eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the hunters. The reflection smiled at her, a slow, sick grin that sent a shiver down her spine. Suddenly, the reflection stepped out of the mirror, just like before, but this time it didn't shatter. It stood there, watching her with those glowing eyes, its twisted smile never wavering. Then, without warning, it lunged. Chapter 22, The Other Lily. The reflection was fast, too fast. It tackled Lily to the ground, its hands wrapping around her throat, squeezing with inhuman strength. Lily struggled, her vision blurring as she fought to break free. But then, something strange happened. The reflection's face began to change. Its features softened, its eyes dimming. For a moment, Lily saw herself, the real her, looking back at her with wide, terrified eyes. And then the reflection spoke. "You are me," it whispered. "And I am you." Lily froze, her mind reeling. The reflection loosened its grip, standing up and backing away. It stared at her for a long moment before disappearing back into the mirror, leaving Lily alone in the chamber. She was shaking, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. What had just happened? Was she losing her mind? Chapter 23, The Unraveling. Lily's grip on reality was slipping. The walls of the labyrinth seemed to pulse and breathe, the symbols on the stones shifting and changing before her eyes. The air was thick with the whispers of the echoes, their voices blending together into a maddening chorus that echoed in her mind. She couldn't tell what was real anymore. The reflection, the mirrors, the labyrinth, it all felt like a sick game, designed to break her down, to make her doubt herself. But one thing was certain, the hunter was still out there, watching, waiting for her to fall. Lily knew she couldn't stay in the labyrinth forever. She had to keep moving, had to find a way out. But every step she took felt heavier, like the weight of the hollow roads was pressing down on her, crushing her spirit. Chapter 24, The Hunter's Lair. After what felt like an eternity, Lily found herself standing in front of a massive, iron door. It was covered in the same glowing symbols as the walls of the labyrinth, but these were different. They pulsed with a strange, dark energy, as if they were alive. The door creaked open, revealing a large chamber beyond. At the center of the chamber stood the hunter, its glowing eyes fixed on her. But this time, it wasn't just watching. It was waiting. The chamber was filled with shattered mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of Lily. Some were twisted and grotesque, others were broken and bleeding, and still others were completely still, their eyes empty and hollow. The hunter's gaze never wavered as Lily stepped into the chamber. It didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence was overwhelming, filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. Chapter 25, The Final Choice. Lily could feel the weight of the hunter's gaze bearing down on her, but she didn't back down. She had come too far, endured too much to give up now. But the hunter wasn't here to chase her anymore. It wanted something else. It wanted her mind, her soul. The mirrors around her began to glow, each one reflecting a different aspect of her fear, her doubt, her anger. The hunter's glowing eyes shifted, flickering between the reflections, waiting for her to make a choice. Lily realized then that the hunter didn't want her body. It wanted her to surrender, to give up her mind, her will, and become part of the hollow. She had to choose. Stay and fight, or give in to the madness. Chapter 26, The Endless Return. Lily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't let the hunter win. She couldn't let herself become another echo, wandering the hollow roads for eternity. She grabbed a shard of broken glass from one of the shattered mirrors and stepped toward the hunter. It didn't move, didn't react, but its glowing eyes followed her every step. With a cry of defiance, Lily plunged the shard into the hunter's chest. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, but it didn't fall. Instead, the world around her began to shatter, the walls of the chamber cracking and breaking apart. Chapter 27, The Shattered Reality. The world around Lily began to break apart. The walls of the chamber crumbled into nothingness, the mirrors shattering into thousands of pieces. The ground beneath her feet cracked, revealing a vast void below, pulling at her like a black hole. The hunter remained standing, but something had changed. Its body was flickering, as if it was caught between worlds, no longer fully solid. Its glowing eyes dimmed slightly, and it let out a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the collapsing space. Lily stumbled backward, the shard of glass still clutched in her hand. She wasn't sure if she had hurt the hunter or if this was part of its game. Everything felt wrong. The floor, the walls, the very air, it was all shifting, warping, like reality itself was unraveling. Then, without warning, the hunter spoke. "You can never escape." Its voice was deep, layered, and inhuman. As it spoke, the walls of the chamber stretched and twisted, transforming into an endless corridor of doors, each one different, each one leading to an unknown fate. Chapter 28, The Corridor of Choices. Lily found herself standing in the middle of the endless corridor, the doors stretching out before her in both directions. Some of the doors were old and decaying, others were pristine, shining as if newly made. But each one pulsed with the same dark energy as the labyrinth's symbols. The hunter was gone, or so it seemed, but she could still feel its presence looming over her, watching her, waiting. There was no going back. The only way out was forward. Lily walked down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The doors whispered to her as she passed, their voices soft and insidious, urging her to open them. Each door promised something different: freedom, safety, truth, power. But she knew better. None of these doors led to salvation. Each one was a trap, another layer of the hunter's twisted game. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the choices. Was this another trick, another way for the hunter to break her? Chapter 29, Behind the Door. Finally, Lily stopped in front of a door that seemed different from the others. It was plain, unadorned, and looked like it didn't belong in this warped reality. Something about it felt familiar. Hesitating for only a moment, she reached out and turned the handle. The door swung open with a low creak, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, there was a single object, a mirror, standing in the center of the room. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had seen enough mirrors to know they were dangerous, that they could twist her mind, trap her in illusions. But this mirror felt different. She stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind her. Her reflection stared back at her, normal, unbroken. But then her reflection smiled. Chapter 30, The Reflection Speaks. Lily's blood ran cold. Her reflection was moving on its own, watching her with an expression she didn't recognize. It stepped forward, reaching out a hand toward the glass. "You're still here," her reflection whispered, its voice an eerie echo of her own. "After everything you've seen, you're still trying to fight." Lily backed away, shaking her head. This isn't real." Her reflection laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "None of this is real. But you knew that, didn't you? You knew from the moment you stepped into the hollow roads that nothing here makes sense. The hunter isn't your enemy." Lily's head spun. "What do you mean?" Her reflection's eyes darkened, glowing faintly with the same light as the hunter's. "The hunter is just the gatekeeper. The real danger is the truth." The mirror shattered suddenly, sending shards flying through the air. But instead of hitting Lily, the shards froze in place, hanging motionless around her. Chapter 31, The Reality Twist. The world around Lily began to twist, the room warping like a funhouse. The walls stretched and bent, the floor cracking and splitting. The shards of the mirror began to rotate around her in slow, hypnotic spirals. Her reflection's voice echoed through the room, its words bouncing off the walls like a distorted chorus. "You've been here before, Lily. This isn't the first time." Lily's mind reeled. "What are you talking about? You've walked these roads 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways. You don't remember, but that's part of the curse. You're caught in the loop. The hunter is just keeping you here, trapped in the cycle. It's all a game." The realization hit Lily like a punch to the gut. She had been here before. The memories were fragmented, buried deep in her mind, but they were there. She had tried to escape before, many times. And every time, she had failed. Chapter 32, The Fragmented Truth. The shards of glass around her began to glow, each one showing a different memory, a different version of her journey through the hollow roads. In one shard, she saw herself running from the hunter. In another, she was wandering the labyrinth. In yet another, she was standing before the altar, surrounded by echoes. Each version of herself was slightly different, but the outcome was always the same. She never escaped. The loop always reset. This is the truth, her reflection whispered from the shards. You're trapped in a maze of your own making. Every choice you've made has led you right back here. Lily's knees buckled, and she fell to the floor, her mind racing. None of it had been real, not the echoes, not Jacob, not the endless roads. It was all a construct, a prison designed to keep her mind locked in the same cycle of fear and despair. Chapter 33, The Hunter's Game. The room began to shift again, the walls peeling away like layers of an onion. Lily was no longer in the small room. She was back on the road, the endless highway stretching out before her. The hunter stood in the distance, watching her, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. But this time, Lily saw the truth. The hunter wasn't real, not in the way she had thought. It was part of the loop, part of the game that had been designed to keep her trapped. It wasn't hunting her, it was keeping her in place. She understood now that the hunter wasn't the villain. It was just doing its job, enforcing the rules of the prison she was stuck in. The real danger was the loop itself. Chapter 34, The Infinite Loop. Lily's mind cracked open like a puzzle box, the pieces finally falling into place. She saw the truth for what it was. She was trapped in an infinite loop, a cycle of fear and madness that repeated endlessly. The hollow roads were a construct, a prison for the mind, and every version of herself had been another attempt to escape. But the loop was self-sustaining. It fed off her fear, her despair, her will to survive. No matter how many times she tried to break free, the loop would always reset, erasing her memories and starting the game over again. The hunter stepped closer, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. It didn't speak, but Lily understood its message. There was no escape. Chapter 35, The Collapse. Lily's mind raced as she tried to process the enormity of the truth. Everything, the hollow roads, the hunter, the echoes, had been carefully crafted to keep her trapped. It was a game she couldn't win, a puzzle with no solution. But something inside her refused to give in. She had broken through the illusions before, shattered the mirrors, and seen the cracks in the walls of her prison. Maybe there was a way to escape, even if the game was rigged. The world around her began to collapse, the road crumbling beneath her feet, the sky tearing open like a sheet of fabric. The hunter stood still, watching as the hollow roads fell apart around them. Lily ran. She didn't know where she was going, but she had to keep moving. She had to break free, even if it meant running through the endless void. Chapter 36, The Final Confrontation. As she ran, the world shifted around her, the road twisting and warping in impossible ways. The hunter was no longer behind her. It was ahead of her, blocking her path, standing like a shadowy sentinel in the middle of the highway. This time, Lily didn't run. She stood her ground, her fists clenched at her sides. I know what you are, she said, her voice steady. I know this is a loop. The hunter didn't respond. It didn't need to. Its glowing eyes told her everything. This ends now, Lily whispered. She charged forward, her heart pounding, her mind clear for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Chapter 37, The Breaking Point. As Lily lunged toward the hunter, time seemed to slow. She could feel the weight of the loop pressing down on her, trying to pull her back into the endless cycle. Her body felt heavy, her mind fractured, but she kept pushing forward. The hunter didn't move. It watched her with its glowing eyes, almost as if it expected this moment, as if it had seen this play out countless times before. When Lily reached the hunter, she plunged the shard of glass deep into its chest. The world around them shook violently, the ground splitting apart, the sky tearing open with a deafening crack. The hunter let out a low, guttural growl, its body convulsing as black smoke poured from the wound. For a brief moment, Lily thought she had won. She thought she had broken the loop, shattered the prison that had held her captive for so long. But then the truth hit her like a tidal wave. Chapter 38, The Realization. The world didn't break apart, it reset. Everything around her, the road, the trees, the sky, flickered, then reappeared, as if nothing had ever changed. The hunter stood before her once again, its eyes glowing with that same eerie light. The shard of glass was gone from her hand, as though it had never existed. Lily's breath caught in her throat. No matter what she did, no matter how many times she fought, the loop would always reset. The hunter wasn't a creature that could be killed. It was a manifestation of the loop itself, an enforcer of the twisted reality she was trapped in. It wasn't hunting her for sport. It was keeping her in the game, ensuring that the cycle continued. She could never win because the loop wasn't meant to be broken. It was meant to contain her. Chapter 39, The Fractured Timeline. Lily collapsed to her knees, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. She was never meant to escape. Every choice she had made, every version of herself that had fought to break free, had been part of the loop. The hunter approached her slowly, its glowing eyes unblinking, unwavering. It didn't need to say anything. Its presence alone told her everything she needed to know. Lily's mind began to unravel as she saw the fractured timelines around her, countless versions of herself, all running through the same roads, all fighting the same battle, and all ending in the same place, right back where they started. Each version of Lily had believed they were close to escaping, close to breaking free from the hunter's grasp. But they were all wrong. There was no escape. The loop wasn't a prison for her body. It was a prison for her mind. Chapter 40, The Endless Fall. Suddenly, the ground beneath Lily's feet gave way, and she was falling. The road, the trees, the sky, everything shattered into pieces, dissolving into the dark void below. The fall seemed to last forever, the wind rushing past her as she plummeted into the abyss. Her mind raced, memories flashing before her eyes. She remembered running through the hollow roads, fleeing from the hunter, finding Jacob, fighting her reflection in the mirrors. But now, it all seemed distant, like a dream she could barely recall. The truth was sinking in. There was no escape from the hollow roads because there was no beginning or end to them. She had been falling forever, falling through an endless void of broken timelines and fractured realities. The hollow roads were just a manifestation of her own fear, her own despair, trapping her in a cycle that would never end. The hunter wasn't the enemy. The hunter was the loop, the enforcer of a reality that had no exit. Chapter 41, The Loop Restarts. The void around her twisted, pulling at her mind, and suddenly, she was standing back on the highway. The same highway she had been on when the nightmare first began. The same cracked asphalt, the same twisted trees, the same endless road stretching out in front of her. The hunter was nowhere to be seen, but its presence lingered in the air, a constant reminder that she was still trapped. She could feel the weight of the loop settling back into place, like a heavy chain around her neck. Her car was parked on the side of the road, just as it had been when she and Max had first arrived at Hollow Creek. Max. Lily's heart clenched as she remembered her brother. But when she looked into the car, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Sitting in the driver's seat was another version of herself, staring blankly ahead, her eyes glazed over with the same hollow emptiness as the echoes she had seen before. This wasn't just a reflection. It was her. The loop had already begun to reset. Chapter 42, The Cycle Continues. Lily tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her body felt heavy, weighed down by the crushing realization that she was doomed to repeat this nightmare for eternity. She watched helplessly as the version of herself in the car started the engine and pulled onto the road. And then it hit her, this wasn't the first time she had seen this. She had watched herself drive away before, trapped in the same endless loop, over and over again. There were infinite versions of herself, all playing out the same story, all running from the hunter, all trying to escape the hollow roads. But none of them ever made it out. The road stretched on forever, and the hunter would always be there, waiting. Chapter 43, The True Nature of the Hunter. As the other Lily drove away, disappearing into the distance, the hunter appeared once again. This time, it didn't chase her. It didn't need to. Lily stood frozen in place, her mind shattered by the truth. The hunter was a part of her. It wasn't some external force hunting her, it was the manifestation of her own despair, her own fear, her inability to accept that there was no escape. The hunter was her, and she was the hunter. The hollow roads were a prison she had created for herself, a mental labyrinth that she could never leave. And the worst part was, she had chosen this. In some distant, forgotten past, she had chosen to enter the hollow roads, to surrender her mind to the endless cycle of fear and madness. Now, she was just one of countless versions of herself, forever trapped in a loop that would never end. Chapter 44, The Endless Horizon. The hunter stood silently, watching as Lily finally understood the truth. There was no point in running anymore. No point in fighting. She was a part of the loop now, just like all the other versions of herself that had come before. The road stretched out before her, endless and unforgiving. The twisted trees swayed in the distance, and the sky above was an impenetrable void. And yet, in the distance, she could still see the flickering lights of Hollow Creek, calling her back. The loop was pulling her in again, starting the cycle over. Lily took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she would never escape. Epilogue. The final reset. The hollow roads remained silent and still. Somewhere, far off in the distance, another Lily was beginning her journey, stepping out of her car and walking into the endless nightmare. Another version of herself would soon be running from the hunter, thinking she could escape. But it was all a lie. The cycle had no end. And in the center of it all, the hunter watched, its glowing eyes fixed on the road ahead, waiting for the next iteration of Lily to make her move. The hollow roads would never let her go. And neither would she.